And so my initial why was I need to do this for my wife and my kids. They don't particularly like who I am either. And if I'm going to do something, they're going to be my primary focus. That's where kind of the initial why. That has evolved. I now do it for myself a lot too. The better I can take care of myself, the better state of mind I personally am in, then that allows me to be a better person and a better husband and a better father.
Hey, Uncommon Leaders, welcome back. This is the Uncommon Leader Podcast, and I'm your host, John Gallagher. Jeff Goodrich, it's great to have you on the Uncommon Leader Podcast, my friend. How are you doing today?
I'm doing very good. Thank you, John, for having me on. Happy to be here.
Absolutely. Looking forward to our conversation, talking about your book today and what you have going on, and maybe even a little bit about what's next for you as well. But before we do that, I'll give you the first question I always give my first-time guests on the Uncommon Leader Podcast, and that's, could you tell us a story from your childhood that still impacts who you are today as a leader or as a person?
I spent some time thinking about this one. I am the oldest of five kids, and one thing I remember is my mom and dad being young parents trying to figure out how to raise kids, basically. But my mom was an avid reader. She always had a book on the nightstand. She always had a book in the kitchen. Anytime she had a free moment, she was always reading a book. And that always stuck with me, but I didn't understand the value of that until later on in life. And so now I have tried to adopt that same idea of being a learner. And books are a great way to do that. So that's one thing I learned from my mom.
Well, there's no doubt about that. And it took me a while to learn that also. And my mom would, as she listens to this, and I've used this story a couple different times, but she would always say, I told you to read when you were little and you didn't do it as much. And now I'm reading all the time. So, okay, it just takes me a little bit longer than it takes others to get ready to go there. But I know you and I have quite, similar, we'll say, ages in terms of middle life and some of the transformations we made. So I'm looking forward to chatting with you today about your book that came out recently called Dude and Duder, How My Dog Saved My Life. So let's start with this. Who's Dude and who's Duder?
Duder is my dog. He's a Vizsla dog. He's 7 years old right now, and we brought him into our lives when he was just a 10-week-old puppy. And so that is Duder. And there is a story of who Dude is. So we can dive into that a little bit, but let me back up a little bit. Should we do that?
Sure, absolutely.
So the book came about as a result of me essentially hitting midlife and, quote, having a midlife crisis. When I was 49 years old, I was really, really in a bad place in my life. I was living what I call the standard American lifestyle, eating junk food all the time, drinking my daily Dr. Pepper, sitting on the couch every night, watching TV with the big bowl of ice cream, some of these standard things that we're all supposed to do. I was overweight. I was about 70, 75 pounds overweight. My wife, I had learned this later on. She was actually putting plans in place to divorce me. Relationship was very rocky, relationship with the kids. I was just bored, mundane, hated my job, just basically hated life. I think if I went to the doctor, I would probably be diagnosed with depression, stuff like that. Then I decide somewhere along the line here, okay, something's not right. I need to change something. And I decided to get a dog. Talked my wife into getting a dog. We found a Vizsla puppy and brought Duder in. And it all started one day when my wife said, take that dog for a walk. Put the leash on Duder. We walked out the front door. It was cold. I was miserable. I'm like, what am I doing out here? But we went for a walk around the block. But John, nothing extraordinary happened on that first walk. Not like this massive aha moment. Oh, I'm going to change my life type of a thing. But what did happen was the next day we went for another walk, and the next day we did it again, and the next day we did it again. This simple new pattern, new habit starting to form in my life is how it started. And we just started going for a walk every day. And this lasted about a year. And during that time, I turned 50 years old, midlife crisis, all this stuff that comes into your head at 50 years old. Oh, all my regrets of life, all the things I didn't do, all the things I did do. I mean, this is crazy. So this is kind of how it all started right there. And then I started to observe Duder, and I became aware that something was wrong. I made a choice to do something about it. And I decided, why do I need to do this? For my kids, for my wife, for myself. And then I went to work. And then we started just changing things in my life. And I tell the book is written in analogies and stories from my dog, lessons that I learned from my dog. So
Well, you
that's how
touched
it
on it there
started.
that your dog saved your life, right? So it just started with a little walk. You were overweight,
Started
just
with the
started with a
walk.
little walk, but it started with a decision, right? And somebody helped you
Yep.
with that decision, it sounds like. In essence, told you, go do this kind of or else, and what you heard. So you mentioned as you started on that journey, you started to really learn some things, both about Duder through observation, but my guess is you're learning some more things about yourself as you went through that journey to get started. What are some of the things you started to learn about yourself as you went on that journey, those walks?
Well, the awareness is just important. I became aware of, because before I was just living my life coasting along here. I wasn't totally aware of how bad things were. So what I really became aware of and what I learned about myself is, dude, you're doing nothing with your life. You're just coasting here. You can't even, you don't even like to wake up in the morning. A big factor was when I looked in the mirror, and I called it my cringe factor. I would look in the mirror and I did not like that guy. So I learned that I didn't like myself. That was a big part of this, is one thing that I learned. I was just lazy, didn't like myself, and it looked in the mirror and it would just make me cringe.
Hmm. That awareness is critical. And then the
Yeah.
choice that you made, obviously, going forward is critical as well. One of the things that I often talked about is we will change when the pain is remaining the same. And it sounds like you had some pain, whether it was through depression or even physically, but that pain remaining the same really has to be greater than the pain of the change itself. The choice to change, the exercise, the disciplines, the habits that you need to put in place. But even more importantly, and you touched on it, the why. So what was the moment for you where that why kind of crystallized or came into vision? And what was that why for you?
The why is a constantly changing thing. It really is. And it depends on different stages that you go through, stages of enlightenment, things that come into your mind. And so my initial why was, I need to do this for my wife and my kids. They don't particularly like who I am either. And if I'm going to do something, they're going to be my primary focus. That's where kind of the initial why. That has evolved. I now do it for myself a lot too. The
Hmm.
better I can take care of myself, the better state of mind I personally am in, then that allows me to be a better person and a better husband and a better father. And now, with two grandkids living with me, a better grandfather. So that's kind of how the why's changed a little bit. Is the focus is, I do it for me. I do it because I
Mm.
want to do it.
I love that. And I think that's very important. That self-care becomes so important on that journey, especially us 50 plus guys. We need to make sure that we are, when we get on the other side of that 50, that we realize that we take care of ourselves and we can only be halfway there. We got some things to do, but let's do this right. I may get this a little bit out of order, but you tell me and you can direct me backward. So why write the book, and who did you write it for?
Well, let me share a few lessons from the dog of
Okay,
kind of
okay,
how we got to that state of
okay.
writing a book.
Yeah, and I
Uh,
love the book the way it's laid out in terms of like 75. I think there's like 75 lessons in there. So let's go there. Absolutely. Okay.
well, a couple little things that had the most impact. Probably one that had the biggest impact early on. I'm sitting there on the couch at night watching TV. Duder's sitting next to me. I look over at Duder and I realize he's not watching TV. He doesn't care what's on the TV. And I talk about it in the book, this got me thinking. So I observed the behavior from Duder and it got me thinking about something. I didn't particularly care what was on TV either. I was just watching whatever channel was on. So I realized that input of the TV was just not good for me. Between Hollywood, what they're trying to tell you, between the news, what news and politics is trying to tell you, between the commercials, it's not a real world. And then I made the decision to cancel my TV subscription.
Mm,
So I essentially stopped watching TV. I have not watched mainstream TV for 6 years. I've stopped watching sports. I don't care about sports anymore. I don't pay any attention to politics. My wife and I will sit down and stream a movie now and again, but TV is not a core part of my life. But you then need something else. So that's when I really embraced this idea of reading, listening to books, listening to podcasts. At the time, my daughter referred a podcast to me, and I didn't even know what a podcast was. I'm like, what's a podcast? So I really started doing. So I had a whole new set of inputs coming in, and this had a huge impact. Okay, there's so much more out there in the world that I wasn't aware of. Different ways to think about life, different ways to think about things. Started listening to health and fitness type programs. And then, another lesson from Duder was that when we first brought him in, I spent a great deal of time researching what to feed him. What do I
mm.
feed Duder? What kind of food do I buy? Kibble, raw, whatever, whatever. And that really got me thinking about I spent so much more time researching what to feed him than what to feed myself. So I started researching what to feed myself. And I made some choices here of changing my nutrition. And I went into it. I've tried to lose weight in the past. You go on a diet and, it's just an up and down fundamental thing.
Mm-hmm.
But I went into it a little bit different this time. You don't go run out and join a gym to lose weight. That's just not how it works. I had to get my mind straight first. So why do I want to lose weight? Then I changed my nutrition, meaning I needed to change a lifestyle nutrition, not go on a diet because a diet is a temporary thing. So I fundamentally did that. And, 6, 7, 8 months, I pretty much lost all 70 pounds.
Wow.
So that had a huge
That's
impact. So here I am physically feeling so much better. The nutrition changes how your brain operates. So my brain could operate so much better. And then all this new input's coming in allowed me to start, okay, what else can I learn from Duder? And I started this little blog of all these ideas of things. That's how it started.
okay.
And then at one point I had this idea. In fact, there's another lesson from Duder. Okay, keep going with these lessons, right?
There you go.
Um, it happened when I would take Duder out, and we got to the point where I would take him out for a walk out on these trails, and I'd have to put a leash on him. And we'd reach a point where there were not a lot of people around, so I'd reach down and pull that leash off, and Duder would just take off running down the trail as fast as he could go. It was fun to watch. And it really got me thinking about what are some of the leashes that I had on myself. In the past, I couldn't even conceive of the possibility of writing a book. That was just, what are you talking about, write a book? But you start thinking about it, you start taking these leashes off. What's holding me back? What's holding me back? And then somewhere along the line, this idea, why can't I turn my blog into a book? Why can't I write all this into a book? And so I just started writing a book and put it all together. So that's kind of how the book came about.
Love that. Love that compiling those together. And that makes sense in terms of how the book is compiled, those stories that you had. You talked about a couple of them already. Jeff, do you have a favorite one or two that really kind of just stick with you and are go-to stories you like to think about all the time?
There is one that, yes, really sticks with me. And I've explored this and I continue to explore this one. Well, at some point, and we can talk about this, John, at some point along my journey here, I lost the weight. My daily walks started turning into running, and I've become an avid runner. And one of my favorite stories from Duder is I would take him out for these runs, and we would go out early morning, and I'd have to have him on, depending where we're going. Sometimes on the trails, I'd let him go off leash. Sometimes in the neighborhoods, I'd have to have him on a leash. We'd be running along, and he would always have to stop to take a poop, right? So I'd have to
Mm-hmm.
stop running. I'd have to sit there and wait for him to finish. Then I'd have to pull out my poop bag, clean up his mess. And here I got this warm bag of poop in my hand,
Mm-hmm.
and we'd have to continue our run. And I'm carrying this warm bag of poop while we're running. It was not fun and smelly and everything. And it really got me thinking about 50 plus years of my life. how much poop bags was I
Mm.
carrying around in my head? These represented past events, past things. I even have memories of somebody saying things to me when I was in junior high school that were still in my head. Things
Wow.
that my wife and I would fight about over 30 plus years of marriage, still hanging on to it. And it would cause aggravation. And so a lot of people, a lot of events, a lot of past thinking represented these poop bags. And I was still carrying them around with me. And it takes time. You can't just go drop the poop bag in the garbage can and they're out of your head. There's tools and techniques, to do this, but that's one of my more powerful lessons. You got to get that stuff out, throw it away, get it out of your head. It's all in the past. Doesn't serve me at all right now. That's one of my favorite lessons.
Jeff, I love that. And again, even going back to what you were speaking about previously, the limiting beliefs that we have, but also, I'll use the term at least insecurities that exist. Those highlight reels of the times that we think back on those negatives, and at times have the ability to far outweigh the positives. But certainly, the analogy of carrying it around like a warm poop bag puts a different perspective on it. Now, you mentioned tools and techniques as well. So let's stay on that poop bag story. What are some what are one or two tools or techniques that you've utilized to be able to let go of some of those highlights that continue to play over and over?
Well, one is I've developed over the last few years a daily mantra. These include things like I am statements, I am worthy, I'm proud of myself, I am a successful person, things like that. I have quite a list. And I keep a version of it on my phone, keep a version of it in my wallet. I read it every morning and I read it every night. And so just this daily mantra helps plant these seeds in your head. That's one thing. I've done little things where you know, even like even like 2 weeks ago, somebody at work says something to me, and I'd go out on this run, and I keep thinking about it in my head. I can't get this thing this person said to me. How do I get her out of my
Hmm.
head? I've done really silly things. It might sound silly, but close my eyes, visualize this big room in my head, and I got a big red door in front of me. I open that door, I push that person out, and I close the door. And that helps
Hmm.
just get those thoughts out of my head. That's one technique that I've used.
So visualization technique to go along with, frankly, positive affirmations or
Yeah.
positive thoughts to keep yourself in the right frame of mind as well. Because yeah, our
Yeah.
mind really doesn't know the difference between a negative and a positive statement. So when those negative thoughts pop into our head, absolutely, when you can recognize that, back to your really your one of your first statements, be aware of that, and help to overcome that as quickly as we can, kicking that thought or person out the red door. Love that as a
Out the red
technique
door.
in terms of going forward. I appreciate you sharing those two things. Let me ask you, Jeff, like you've had these things in terms of having an impact on your life. Do you have a success story about someone who shared with you a win that you're particularly proud of with regards to learning from you or learning from your book that you would like to share?
Maybe there's a couple. Yes, I've heard from a few people that they enjoyed the book. They were inspired. It. I mean, I have a cousin that is now in the process. She's lost about 50 pounds so far, and she started walking her
Wow.
dog every day. And that's how it starts. Simple things. She started walking her dog every day, changed her nutrition. And she's now lost about 50 pounds. So just observing that. I will share this, John. I have joined my local my local Toastmasters club. And our Toastmasters Club also has a Toastmasters Club at our local women's prison. So some of these residents that are in prison attend these Toastmasters meetings, and we help teach them. We let them practice things like standing up in front of a parole board, and they practice what's called an icebreaker speech, give a 4 to 6 minute speech, tell us about your life. And I've heard some horrific stories from these
Mm,
residents in this women's prison.
can't imagine.
But I've delivered my little story and little speech to them, to these residents several times, and they really love the story. And a couple of the residents have gotten out of prison. They continue to attend Toastmasters Club. They all bought a copy of my book. They've all read it and they've all started to incorporate it. And they tell me on a regular basis that it had a role in them overcoming some of the things that they've had in their lives. So that's something I will share.
That's impactful. I appreciate you sharing that. No doubt about it. And something that you can absolutely be proud of in terms of what changed. So you've been through that journey over 5 years. Um, what are some of the things that you continue to put in place to ensure? You mentioned lifestyle. Now you're a runner. I recently read something where you completed, what is it, an ultra, a 50 miler? So you
50
went
miler.
from, just a few years ago, not walking at all and despising walking your dog even once in terms of the activity that it was. And now you're running 50 miles at one time. Goodness gracious. What else you got going on that keeps you going?
Well, that's another lesson from Duder is one time we were out walking and I watched him run and I said, hey, maybe I can do this. I had lost all the weight before you start running. Do not run as a mechanism to lose weight. I wouldn't recommend that. But I started running one day, about 200 yards before I ran out of breath. But I had the thought, maybe I could do this.
Hmm.
So my runs just started getting a little longer. I signed up for half marathons, then I signed up for a few marathons, and then I signed up for a couple of, 55K, a 60K. And then, yeah, in fact, just last Saturday. So what, 4 or 5 days ago, I completed my first 50-mile trail race. The running became very symbolic for me as one, my daily habit, and two, well, if I can keep running farther and farther and farther, then what else can I do? I've already published one book. Can I publish another book?
Hmm.
Can I continue building a coaching practice? Can I continue to help people? I'm here. I want to inspire people. You and I are familiar with a gentleman named Rory Vaden. I remember early on in my journey hearing him on a podcast, and this one statement that resonated with me is you are best suited to help the person you used to be. And there are so many of my old me out there that I would
Mm-hmm.
hope can inspire. I mean, my transformation started roughly 50 years old. I'm 56 right now, and I just finished my next 50 miler. I already have another one on the calendar, by the way. I always have
Fantastic.
something on the calendar. I always continue. So
Fantastic.
there's
Love
there's
to
a
hear
couple
that, Jeff.
things that keep me going. So there's always if you think about people going on a diet, losing weight, and what percentage of them just gain the weight back. It's because they do something, they reach a milestone, and then they just fall back into their old patterns. And so that was really hard for me. How do I keep going? Now that I've made some changes, what keeps me going? And there's probably a couple of different things that really drive me. One that's more powerful for me is fear of regrets.
Mm.
When I hit 50 and had all these regrets, oh, I did not like it. So I incorporate fear into that. I do not want any more regrets in my life. I'm afraid of them. And if I don't put myself out there, if I don't put myself in the race, if I don't do everything that I can, then I will have regrets. And I don't want that. So I use this fear of regrets idea. That's very powerful. Another thing that I've done recently, early on in my journey, I heard from a lot of people, write your own eulogy. A lot of your listeners have probably done that, maybe heard that.
Mm-hmm.
And that was maybe 2 or 3 years ago. So that had an impact on me keeping going and changing. How do I want to be remembered? But about a month ago, John, I did it a little different. I needed to change it up a little bit because I realized that I wrote my eulogy with my family, friends, and all these people in the audience. And so as I continued on doing things, I realized, well, I was really doing them for how I want them to remember me. So I sat down about a month ago and redid my eulogy with me as the speaker, me in the casket, and me, the only one in the audience. How do I want me to remember me? And my eulogy turned out very different when you do that. So they both play a role, but I really wanted to know, how do I want myself to remember me? Nothing to do with anybody else. And that really drives me forward. And that kept me going through my 50-mile race, which took me 13 hours to do, by the way. So
Wow.
it was mentally exhausting. So
It has to be something. Jeff, I appreciate that perspective as well. Like what do you want yeah,
Yeah.
to be aware of yourself at that point in time? And it's, you mentioned the fear of regret that is something that may drive you, but certainly, yeah, don't leave anything in the tank, right? I mean, that's the thing. Use it up. The gifts that you've been
Yep.
given, those God given abilities, use them up. Don't leave them there, and continue to make an impact as you go forward. And speaking of impact, it's a book test that actually another Brand Builders Group author has talked about before. Someone's going to read your book, Jeff. We're going to put a link to it in the show notes that folks can go and get it. Clearly, you can get it on Amazon, Dude and Duder. When somebody is finished reading that book and they're going to set it up on a shelf, just like the one that's kind of behind me in terms of books that are there. And a year later, they're going to walk by that bookshelf. They're going to see that binding and they're going to see the name of that book. What do you want them to take away when they see that binding? What do you want them to think of when they see that book sitting on the shelf?
Change is possible. Regardless of age or circumstance, you can change your life. That'd probably be the most important message.
Change is possible. Love that. And again, I think you've talked about many different things. Mindset. You've talked about starting small. It just starts with a little walk, right? And it turns into a 50-mile run or a 60-mile run, a 50-mile trail run, which is totally different than just running on the street. No doubt about it in terms of what happens, and continuous improvement in ourselves that we're never really done. I like that as you think about that eulogy exercise that's there. Jeff, I think this has been a great conversation that we've had. Where can folks stay in touch with you going forward? Because you're going to have more things to talk about. You're going to have more things to say. You're going to have more things to write about as you go forward. Where can they connect with you?
Best place is on my website, dudeandduder.com. And I have an Instagram page, YouTube channel, and some of those social things that I'm trying to and starting to build up. But that's primarily,
Okay.
and I have a weekly newsletter. Um, you can follow me on there, and all my past newsletters are posted on the website too.
Okay. Back to something that we started with. You told me who Duder was. Who's Dude?
Along the journey here, at some point, when I would look in the mirror and did not like that guy I used to see, sometimes you have to create a new version of yourself. And that's essentially what I was working on. That old guy, Jeff, just wasn't going to cut it. Old thinking, old patterns, old lifestyle just wasn't going to cut it. So I mentally did this exercise of I got to create a new version of me. The new version of me is Dude. And it just happens to be a good marketing thing to go along with the dog's name, Duder.
Yeah, it sounds good, right? I mean, put that marketing thing aside, but I love the persona that exists
Yeah.
inside of there. And again, some of that, whether it's looking in the mirror, but it's talking about even that new mindset that you talked about. And so maybe that does require a new persona that you have to use to keep you in the mindset you want to be in. Jeff, I've enjoyed our conversation. I know the listeners of the Uncommon Leader podcast are really going to enjoy this. I want to wish you the best going forward with regards to your running, your continued transformation in life as we both move closer from 50 and now into the next decade, as God willing, we get closer to. And certainly best of luck on the next book that you're bringing out as well. So thank you for being a guest on the Uncommon Leader podcast.
Thank you, John. Appreciate it.